There is an old saying that says that we suffer more in imagination than reality, and I think that is exactly the case and exactly what we are seeing inside Raid Shadow Legends currently with the announcement of the Hydra nerfs or the Hydra rework that is coming out. The entire community, especially in the content creation scene, is talking about how bad this is, how all the champions are going to be busted, all the teams are ruined, all those sorts of good, enjoyable, positive things. So I actually wanted to give my thoughts today, and usually I am kind of the type that looks at things a little bit more pessimistically. But when I seen these updates that were coming out for Hydra, I actually got excited because I do think that they are going to make Hydra the best that it has been in a very, very long time. Now, there's a few things that we need to get clear just before we get into the video. So first of all, champions like Trunda are absolutely and in every single way broken, busted, and not working as intended. And the way that we know that is because Plarium has all but admitted it themselves when they actually went ahead and nerfed a champion called Madman, who had a very similar function to the way Trunda worked. So essentially with this the A1 here, he'd have the chance of doing something similar to how Trunda did it, and then Trunda didn't get nerfed, but Madman did, and they said, quote unquote, that he was not working as intended. He wasn't out, or rather Hydra wasn't out when he was created. The same thing was true with Trunda. Trunda is one of the oldest standing damage dealers that we have inside the game, and her A2 is absolutely busted. We've known this for a long time. There isn't much, debate around it anymore, but I want to make sure that we're clear on the fact that Trunda is broken. She's not working as intended, and it is abusing a bug, essentially, to get those high damage Trunda teams. That in mind, let's go ahead and let's take a look at Clan Boss and Hydra specifically. So if we look at Hydra Clash, we can see that the top team in this particular clash is at 57.9 billion. Let's think about that for a few moments, right? So let's take a look at this player here. This player here used one team on Brutal and scored 49.3 billion on his own, out of an entire clan so far scoring 57.9. So with one key, he accomplished more than the rest of his clan was able to do with 17 keys so far. Does that seem like it's working as intended to anyone? Does that seem like a fun game mode to play? Because to me, it certainly doesn't. And you can obviously see that we are abusing the Yumiko, as well as a fully awakened Trunda, as well as two of the Nia, I believe her name is, who can also do resets, and we're essentially just constantly cycling Trunda, of course. It is broken. It is ridiculous. Let's go ahead and take a look at the rewards. So Nightmare Hydra, the highest damage threshold for a chest is going to be 36.6 million damage. The entire Hydra itself on Nightmare only has 610 million damage before you defeat it, and you get double drops for that week. Does it make logical sense to anyone then that we are sitting here manualing keys for sometimes an hour and a half to get records that are going to put us above 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 40 billion damage? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I don't think that that was planned by Plarium, and I don't think that they thought ahead to the kind of damage numbers that players would be attaining with this, because again, they wouldn't have set that threshold as low as 36 million on Nightmare if they thought that players were going to be attaining damages that high. Now, you could argue, oh, they've set these, ranking rewards pretty high, those sorts of things, right? Well, you think about it, the results are multiplicative. So, for example, this 650 million chest, that's only like 325 million if you're hitting Brutal. Or not even Brutal, sorry, if you're hitting Hard, where you have the 2 times clash points, right? So it's not that much damage, all things considered. The other thing you could argue is, well, these personal clash rewards are up to 1.2 billion. Sure, that is correct. However, Plarium also made these so that they don't reset when the Hydra resets, so clearly they're not expecting everyone to hit that 1.2 billion threshold weekly, right? And even for these chests that they're putting out weekly, the lowest threshold is still only at 35 million. So everything in the game so far is pointing towards the fact that we're supposed to have lower damage numbers than a player who can come in and score 49.3 billion on one key inside Brutal Hydra. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and hop over to the actual update video that Raid put out, and we're going to go ahead and react to some of the new announcements inside there. I'll be right back with you. So I've gone ahead and I've hopped over into a browser here, and we're going to be watching the video titled Raid Shadow Legends Update Preview Hydra, Trunda, shields. So they're calling out those 3 things specifically. Let's go ahead, dive into the video, and show you my reaction.
Everyone, we've got a different kind of update preview for you today. We're showing off some balanced changes coming to the Hydra, and a few other areas of the game. Along the way, we'll explain why we're making these changes, but here's a quick overview. The current meta is way too limiting to players who don't have specific champions in their collection.
This is absolutely true. They absolutely nailed it. The entire meta right now inside the Hydra Clash comes down to basically one of 3 champions. Do you have a Trunda? Do you have a Yannicka? And do you have a Emic? That is essentially your options for the entire meta surrounding Hydra. When you think about the Hydra when it first came out, before people discovered all of these just extremely broken teams, there was a lot more max HP damage dealers. People were using HP burns a lot more, those sorts of things. Right now, it's all just about abusing the mechanics as much as you possibly can, and that's your team composition, which is just not a very healthy meta whatsoever, because if you think about the newer players, the lower spend players who might not have these very wide and diverse rosters, they might not necessarily have these champions that can be abused, which means that, you know, a piddly HP burn champion or a lowly max HP champion are just not going to cut the pie the same way, right? So this is definitely on point by Plarium. Let's go ahead and see what else they got for us.
Want you to experiment with different tactics and teams, switching things up each week. Let's dive in and take a closer look at what's coming. First up, we're setting the turn limit at 1,000 turns.
This is fantastic. No argument about it, right? I seen some people on Facebook, and the primary pushback to this is, oh, well, it's 1,500 turns right now is how long I need to get my damage out. I won't have the same damage if it's cut down by 500 turns. A little spoiler alert for anybody who might be playing Hydra or concerned about, you know, running for 1,500 turns. If you need 1,500 turns to get decent damage numbers, the turn count is not your issue. Okay, the turn count is not the problem that you should be worrying about. You should be trying to get your team run under an hour and a half so you don't have to sit there and manual 1,500 turns, right? So whether that be farming for better gear, upgrading your champions more, whether it be books, whatever it might be, right? If you need 1,500 turns to get acceptable damage numbers inside Hydra, you are most definitely doing something wrong. And, you know, that's an issue that this is hopefully going to fix. So this is essentially going to cut a third off of our Hydra runtime, which is absolutely fantastic. There are so many things to do in the game right now. So if we think about it on a daily basis, things that you have to do daily to get all your missions done. So this isn't even extra stuff that you can do, right? So you have Arena, you have Classic Arena, as well as Tag Team Arena that you have to do daily. You also have Live Arena that you should be doing daily if you want to get your Primal Shards. You have City of Centranos that you quite often have to do for, you know, the extra energy inside your advanced quests. You have Faction Wars, you have Doom Tower, Clan Boss, you have to do Hydra at some point during the week, and then you also have to do either like a campaign run, or generally a campaign boss run, or 7 battles of campaign. Additionally, you're also going to have to do at least 3 dungeon runs, right, so that you can actually you know, go ahead and get your advanced quest done. And then on top of all that, you're still going to have to use at least 5 silver keys in the Doom Tower. You think about how many things there are to do in this game, it is absolutely insane. So having a half an hour or more potentially, you know, taken off of each Hydra key throughout the week is going to be over an hour and a half minimum that players are going to be able to save with this change. That in mind, you're not going to be the only one affected. The whales getting those high damage numbers are also going to be affected. The free-to-play or low-spend players that just started doing Hydra are also going to be affected by the same turn limit, right? So overall, this is an absolute win. I'm so happy to see that this was finally changed.
Auto-battling the Hydra can easily take over an hour, so we're aiming to cut down the time by at least half an hour. You'll now need to build teams that do damage faster, rather than teams built for a war of attrition. With a few adjustments, you'll have no problem reaching the damage numbers needed to get your usual rewards. Moving on, we're changing how the Serpent's Will buff works. Most importantly, and brace yourselves folks, it now reduces damage by 100% for a newly grown Hydra head. Yep, you read that right. Complete damage reduction. You won't be able to nuke a newly grown head straight out of the gate anymore. Hold on though, there's good news too.
I think this is absolutely fantastic. A lot of the whale-heavy teams that we were seeing were essentially able to abuse someone like a Trunda or Yannicka to essentially just permanently keep the heads down. Anytime they'd pop up, they'd use a combination of Hex as well as surplus damage to just take them down pretty much instantly again, especially if we're thinking of normal Hydra, where Trunda is, you know, prolifically abused. So that being said, having the heads come back with a complete damage immunity is actually going to make it so you have to start to worry about those Hydra mechanics once again, and you can't just abuse the system that's been put in place, right? Which is just absolutely fantastic. And I would say that in the long run, this change is actually going to help the more free-to-play friendly community. The reason for that being is those players didn't necessarily have the mechanics or the gear to be able to abuse it and keep the Hydra heads down, so they still had to deal with the Hydra mechanics that were essentially just being completely bypassed by the top, like, you know, 10% essentially of Hydra players, Hydra competitors. This is going to change that, which is absolutely fantastic, and I'm so happy to see that this has actually finally been addressed.
If two heads regrow at the same time, only one of them will get the Serpent's Will buff. Champions have gotten stronger since the Hydra initially reared its heads. What with Awakening, Empowerment, and mythical champions joining the fray. We were seeing Hydra heads nuked as soon as they rejoined the battle, even with the 75% damage reduction. So, to make the fight even, and bring back some of the challenge that's been lost due to the game's evolution, the Hydra is getting a little stronger too. We're also making changes to Digestion and Devouring. You know how late on in the battle your champions start getting digested on a 2-turn countdown? Well, for every subsequent time they get digested after that first 2-turn countdown, the damage you'll need to do to free your champion increases. Like with Serpent's Will, Digestion and Devouring lost much of its intended challenge over time as more powerful champions and features were introduced. It was always meant to be one of the Hydra's key mechanics and an ever-present threat, but it became really easy to rescue allies that were being digested. So, we're bringing that fear back into Digestion. Taunts won't help anymore either. The Hydra has shed its thin skin, and petty insults will no longer distract it from a delicious champion meal sat right in front of it. In short, once a champion receives the mark of the Hydra debuff, they become public enemy number 1, and Taunt isn't going to do anything about it. Taunt is a cool mechanic, but new champion combinations emerged that could totally negate the mark of the Hydra. Less cool. It's not all bad news, though. Your team's AI will now prioritize attacking the head that is digesting when you're running in auto battle mode. Teamwork makes the dream work. Exposed necks are also getting a rework. From now on, exposed necks will have a set HP value that is double the original head's HP. Once that value reaches 0, the head will immediately regrow. With constantly regrowing Hydra heads, you'll need to think on your feet and have tactics in place for all potential scenarios.
This is absolutely fantastic. The fact that they're going to have set HP means that, again, you can't abuse those surplus damage numbers. So now I actually watched Saf talking about this inside one of his videos too, and what we're going to have to see is if the damage surplus, or the overkill as he called it, is actually calculated into your Hydra damage. So essentially what is meant by that is, say the Hydra head has 1 million damage, it then becomes a decapitated head, 1 million health, it becomes decapitated, it now has 2 million health. So let's say, hypothetically, you do a damage hit that is able to hit 2.5 million. Obviously you have 500,000, that's more than the HP of the Hydra head that was hit, or the decapitated head in this case. So does that 500,000 make itself into the total damage done, or is that essentially just lost to time? Because he raised the very interesting point that if everybody doesn't get those overkill bonuses, essentially you're just going to be doing the same damage across the board, all champions, all teams. So it's then just going to become a race essentially to see who can survive the longest and who can just keep cycling those heads essentially, right? As opposed to doing raw damage. It does definitely seem like they are leaning in towards more damage dealer focused, right? Or at least making teams that have more of a higher DPS output, which is probably why they've lowered that turn threshold as well, right? Because you were just able to scale it over time and just get obscene numbers, especially with the Yannicka teams, right? So a lot of the world records that we've seen have been with those style of teams, which 100% are not working as intended, right? Like that's just, it is what it is. As much as you might like to use those teams, we would also be being very disingenuous if we said that this was a mechanic that made the game better, right? It does not make it better for anyone in a single situation. It's essentially just a never-ending arms race to who can get the more broken champion first, right? So that doesn't make it fun for anyone. It's not really enjoyable at the end of the day. So these changes are definitely going to help to fix that, which is definitely a positive in my mind. But let's go ahead and continue with the video.
Man, Hydra battles are about to get much tougher. But the changes don't stop there. We've got a few more lined up to help keep things balanced, starting with shields. Shields will now receive a cap of 1 million points. This cap is separate for shields placed by artifacts and shields placed by skills, though, so you could get up to 2 million points of shield. These caps are still big enough to ensure powerful builds remain viable for taking on the Demon Lord and the Hydra, but they'll not be as game-breaking as before. And
yeah, so essentially that part there specifically is to counter the Yannicka teams. We're still going to see someone like Wixwell being used quite often in, regular Demon Lord Clan Boss. It's not really going to break that champion as much as people are saying it will. It's essentially just to counter Yannicka inside Hydra specifically because she does an AoE that does a damage number equal to a certain percentage of the shield, which I believe is like 25% or something like that. So when she was scaling with ridiculously high shields, she could just get obscene damage outputs. There was also a champion by the name of Aislinn from the Bannerlords, the Unity champion, who could basically rip off the shields and then heal someone like an Ironclad, who would just do an AoE damage output that was absolutely obscene as well. And overall, these teams were just, again, outperforming regular, proper, strategic teams inside the Hydra, right? So that's kind of why they wanted to change this. Let's go ahead and see what they're doing with Trunda.
lastly, we come to everyone's favorite dwarven warrior herself, Trunda Guilt Mallet. Don't worry, we're not nerfing her into oblivion. We're just rebalancing some of her skills to keep her damage numbers in Hydra battles more reasonable. Starting with her default skill, Golden Mallet, Trunda will now have a 50% chance to place a stun debuff on both hits. A little upgrade, but a neat one for PvP. Trunda's second skill, Cloak of Ages, will now ignore 50% of each target's defense on her second hit. However, the caveat here is that it will only ever be a normal hit. It's still big damage, but it won't be quite as astronomical as they have been before.
This is definitely nice. Essentially, we were getting like 2 times critical multipliers on the hit because you would essentially do a... so you do an initial hit, which would have a critical multiplier associated with it. So let's say if it did like a 1 million damage hit, right? And then you also had the 1.5 multiplier from a critical hit playing into that extra AoE damage. So you'd do 60% of that, but it could also be critical. It was just obscenely broken. The fact there's extra hit is going to be a normal hit now is nice. And as you can see from some of these heads, she's still doing like 1 million per hit, which is just obscene, right? So she's still a very, very strong champion, and she's still probably going to be very high up in the meta, I would say. Trunda is just a champion that's constantly made a resurgence kind of regardless of where the game is at, so I'd be very hesitant to think that they're going to change that. And the video footage that we see, as a matter of fact, proves that they're not really changing that. It's essentially just a slight reduction in terms of what she is capable of to bring her more in line with where she should be, essentially, right? And the same kind of thing with Yannicka. They didn't change her at all, but they're essentially changing the shield cap, which is, you know, a very, very good way to do it, because it's going to make sure that she remains unchanged for PvP usage, faction wars, all that sort of good stuff, right? So far, the changes look absolutely fantastic. Let's continue.
It's still big damage, but it won't be quite as astronomical as they have been before. Forge Rhythm, Trunda's third skill, now places consistent HP burn debuffs, and both hits from this skill deal 50% more damage to enemies under a stone skin shield. Another neat boost to her overall kit. And finally, her passive skill now increases Trunda's attack by 5% for each stun or HP burn debuff she places on it.
I want to go back real quick, actually. The one thing I was curious about, so it places an HP burn, it places an extra hit on enemies not under stuns. So essentially, what was going on with Trunda is she'd be a bit of a weird champion where you'd want to build her for no accuracy. The reason being is her Forge Rhythm skill would only hit a second time if it didn't place the HP burn, I believe. Now it seems like they're redoing it so that it essentially has basically a chance of placing a stun, and then it also places an extra hit if they're not under a stun. So now we can actually build her with accuracy, and she's going to be a viable HP burn champion for the Hydra. Again, this is the way they've worded it, right? So unless it's, you know, differently, because we have a 70% chance of placing a stun as well. That being said, if you're using her in PvP, a lot of times you're going to be going against champions that are in Stone Skin, so they've actually made her be able to do extra damage to Stone Skin as well. If you go ahead and pair that with the blessing that makes her do extra damage to Stone Skin, I bet we're going to actually see Trunda pop up a little bit more inside the meta, which will be pretty cool. And then also the fact that she's increasing her own attack and stuff like that is going to be an absolutely fantastic boost to her kit as well. Because we all know Trunda's definitely fallen off a little bit, especially in the PvP meta. So having her a little bit more modernized and just brought in today's day and age is going to be very, very good. And seeing this upgrade to her kit where we can actually feel good building her with accuracy now is quite nice as well.
Debuffs, and both hits from this skill deal 50% more damage to enemies under a Stone Skin shield. Another neat boost to her overall kit. And finally, her passive skill now increases Trunda's attack by 5% for each stun or HP burn debuff she places on enemies. Her speed will still be increased as well, both by stun and HP burn debuffs. All in all, Trundle isn't going anywhere. We still expect her to be an excellent choice for Hydra battles and the arena. We tested a ton of early, mid, and late game champion rosters and team compositions when making these changes. Our results showed things will get better. You'll still be able to earn Hydra chests and milestone rewards in Hydra Clash. And you'll spend less time fighting the Hydra each week. As always, we'll be keeping an eye on your feedback and monitoring game data to see how these changes affect Hydra battles overall. We hope this preview has been useful for you and will help you prepare for more battles against the Hydra. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more raid news. Until then, happy raiding. Hey everyone.
Overall, absolutely fantastic changes, I think. It definitely seems like they're leaning more towards the Hydra 1.2 billion chests being kind of like something that you might attain over a couple weeks, which in all honesty, I'm perfectly fine with that, right? Something that we can kind of just grind out over time. And spending less time in Hydra per week is going to be absolutely fantastic, especially with how much content there is already to do in raid, right? Sitting there just brainlessly autoing or manualing rather a Hydra run is not fun for anyone, right? I recorded a Hydra run at one point for one of my YouTube videos, and it was over an hour and 45 minutes of prep time just for that Hydra run alone, which is just obscene. So that being said, let me know what you guys think down below, of course, what you guys think about these changes, and which change you're actually most excited to see inside the game as well. For me, at least, it's probably going to be the Trunda rework. I'm excited to see how she works, especially in the arena. That being said, as always, I'll see you guys next time.